Hello, this is Mike. I'm wanting to make a short or maybe a long video, I don't know. But a topic that I was thinking about the other day. I'll tell you how this came about. Tracy and I were out for the evening. We took a little date as much as we could, had to do a little shopping, and went and got some carry-out dinner. And we were talking as we're in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, really a crisis for the whole world. And as we're in the midst of this, we're just talking about some of the things that we're going to miss out on. For instance, we were planning in a month to go out to the Black Hills and visit Daniel as he was going to be in school out there, and then Rebecca wanted to do a college visit out at Black Hills State, and we just love the Black Hills. We're going to spend a weekend there, several days in the Black Hills, and that we likely won't, well, at this point we already know we are not going to get to do that. And so that's just something that we're going to miss because of this global pandemic that we're in. And then, the same day Daniel had mentioned how he was really going to miss going back to school, and how in the springtime he was really looking forward to being able to go out and hike and bike in the Black Hills, and some of the experiences that he would have had and now has lost. And so got me thinking about the various losses that we're facing because we have to do a lot more staying at home, have to do a lot more sheltering in place, and just social isolation, social distancing, but what leads to isolation and not getting to do the things that we would have otherwise gotten to do. And I began to think about the importance of grieving, and that there's actually a good portion of scripture, for instance, that talks about lament, or learning to grieve well. Even this morning I was thinking about Psalm 42 and 43, how why are you downcast within me, my soul? And that there are times when we are just not feeling good, and we're not feeling right in the midst of all this. Part of that is because there's some legitimate loss here going on, and it's just, we can't just simply kind of make it up to, oh, it'll be all better. In fact, those things, those experiences are going to be gone, and we can't necessarily get those things back. And it might even include, what I'm thinking about here is that the truth is we need to learn how to experience those losses, and it's possible people might get sick around us, and we might even lose people because of this pandemic. But even if we don't because of this, there might be losses in jobs, there's certainly losses in school experiences, there's lots of different losses happening in our life right now. And as people, as Christians, we need to learn how to grieve well. I think in our society we don't always know how to grieve well, especially because we can placate ourselves and medicate ourselves, and we don't want to feel sad, but sometimes it's the right thing to feel sad because there's legitimate loss. And so I want to just talk a little bit about grieving well. Like I said, the Bible actually talks about that. There's a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations, where the prophet Jeremiah is lamenting the loss of Jerusalem, his home, his nation. And it was even because of their own sin, but he saw the destruction caused by this invading nation, and that it happened because of their own sin. So I just want to talk a little bit about, how we need to lament, and why we need to lament. And I guess that maybe that's the first thing I want to talk about is the why. That if you don't lament, then what's going to happen if you don't learn how to grieve is that stuff is going to come back up. It's not going to go away. We have this inside of us regardless. And if we don't cry, we don't acknowledge the sadness, it comes out in other ways. For instance, we might hold on to things like bitterness, and we might get a bitter spirit inside of us, and that expectations weren't met. It can lead to anger because there's an emotion, and if we're holding it down, that emotion is going to come out, and that might look like in this time anger towards other people. Perhaps some of the social isolation is a lament or a grieving of things that we've lost, and that causes problems in the family. It can lead to depression, to the thoughts that life isn't going to get any better, that it'll never be good again. I've lost this one good thing, and I stay stuck uh, in my sense of loss and not understanding, can things be good in the future, not being able to see the good things that maybe you have right now, or maybe that you will have in the future. So I think that's why we need to grieve well. So the first point I want to make is just that it's really important to go through this process, because if we don't, we will end up experiencing that emotion somewhere in our life. It'll just come out in a way that's not intentional and not helpful to us, and oftentimes it's unconscious and will impact both our own attitudes and then the relationships around us. So that's just the first thing I want to mention. Just this is why we need it, because we have real losses, and losses hurt, and that pain is going to come out somewhere. So the second thing I want to talk about then is how do we grieve? What should we do in the midst of a time of loss? And the first thing we need to do is to be able to name it, to acknowledge our loss. And I would really encourage, writing it down, talking it out. What is it exactly that is lost? And so if there's, place, if you like to journal, write down the specifics of your loss. And it doesn't just have to do with this pandemic. This is an opportunity to learn perhaps a lesson that you might not otherwise have, a skill that you might not otherwise have, but that you'll need in life. You need to learn to grieve, because you will have losses, in fact. And so write it down, journal it out. If you're not a journaler, then find somebody that you can tell it to. Who can you talk about it? This is why it's important. Even if we can't be with other people, we can sometimes on social media talk about these things. Sometimes just our family members, or get together, in some sort of video conferencing and talk about our losses. Now, I want you to remember here not to compare and contrast losses. Sometimes, we can get into that whole, oh yeah, this is my loss and it's so bad compared to your loss. Well, each loss is different. Each loss is real. And some are smaller than others. But even the smaller losses, we need to learn to grieve. You lose out on an opportunity. A high schooler doesn't get to go as, maybe a couple of my kids would have gone to certainly district speech and state speech, and that's gone for this year. That's a real loss, and they need to learn how to acknowledge that. And if you can learn how to acknowledge the smaller losses, then you can also learn how to deal with the larger losses. Another part of acknowledging loss is not just the initial thing, perhaps the fact that there's multiple losses going on. For instance, abuse is a loss in and of itself. So if you've been abused, somebody hurt you, that's something that you lost, and maybe it happened as a child. That's a real loss, a loss of innocence. It's a violation, but it almost always leads to secondary losses as well. For instance, if that abuse created in us a protectiveness that means that we can't have close relationships, that might create a secondary and multiple losses through the years of not being able to have the types of close relationships that we should be able to have. So there's a lifetime of loss, and that needs to be acknowledged. And it's one of the reasons that we need to learn to grieve well now, because if we don't recognize the losses that we're going through in the moment, the longer that lasts, the more losses will multiply on themselves, because our personalities will change as a result of it. So learn to write it down, learn to talk it out, learn to cry in the midst of it, then feel sad about that. Acknowledging that is that when you're acknowledging that you're sad, you're acknowledging this was a good thing, and that I no longer have this good thing. Whether that's a person that is gone now, whether that's an opportunity that's lost, that was a good thing, and you can be thankful that you had some opportunity, and that was a good thing. And if there's a lost person, the remembrances, the crying, the grief is actually acknowledging your love for that person, that you really cared about them, that they were significant in your life. Having lost our son Micah, for me, that's really important. When I think about him and I still cry, it's because he was good in my life. It was a blessing from the Lord. And when we grieve, we remember those blessings. Another part of acknowledging the loss is sometimes we have to ask, why? Why did this happen to me? As we're grieving, there's questions that are going to come up. Why did it happen in general? Why is this virus out there? Why did it happen to me? It doesn't mean you're always going to come back with an answer. As a matter of fact, sometimes we don't come back with an answer. And in that process, we acknowledge that we're not in control. We have to learn that we're not always in control of our lives, and that we have to admit that we're not God. Again, I think in our modern world, what happens is we have so many ways to distract ourselves that we don't have to think about these various things. But sometimes it's really actually good to sit and be quiet and to grieve our losses. But we are acknowledging that I can't control the world, that everything in this world is temporary. Everything, including our very lives, is temporary. And so that's something that we have to learn to acknowledge. The other part of asking the question why is sometimes we don't like the answer, and that's sometimes why we don't want to ask the question. And don't want to deal with loss. Sometimes a loss is because of our own behavior. But that doesn't mean it's less of a loss. It's still there. If it was my sin that caused the situation I'm in, it could be addiction, it could be a relationship that I helped to break, and then that good thing is gone from me. But it still hurts, and there's still pain. And when we think about that, we might have to acknowledge then, why did it happen? Well, because I behaved this way. And then when we're intentional about that, we have to recognize, and if I don't want to continue to experience loss like this, I might have to change. But we can't acknowledge what we have to change until we get it in the light, until we recognize there's something that is wrong here. This is painful. And I want to bring this into the light then. So once we've acknowledged it, brought it into the light, grieved over the loss, then we can do the next thing, which is to get the big picture. This is when we can go and remember the truths. I love this passage in Psalm 42 and 43 because it talks about spirit being downcast within me, but I will still praise the Lord. That there is an acknowledgement that there's a higher truth. There's something beyond myself there. And we also see the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. He doesn't say, don't grieve. In fact, we're going to grieve. There is real loss. But we don't grieve as those who don't recognize that, hey, this life isn't all there is. There is eternity. And as a Christian, I can have a different perspective on life and death and eternity. I recognize that this world is temporary. This is not my final home. And while these are good things here, they're not the best things. In fact, when I begin to think about the higher things, I recognize that all the good things I have here are actually just a reflection of the one who is truly good. I can go to God then, and that's part of this, is just acknowledging that God is the one who is truly good, and He is the source of all this goodness. And so that's a higher truth than I can get to. And I also begin to recognize that loss is not forever. That even if everything in this world goes away, because I have a relationship with Jesus, I know better is coming. There is hope then that I can have in my life. And that my life has a meaning beyond this. Even the big picture, if it's my own problem, if it's my own sin, when I go and I get the big picture, the truth of what God has said is that there is forgiveness available. And there's restoration available. It doesn't mean all the stuff is coming back, but the goodness of relationship with God and eternity can still be there for me, even though I was the one that messed it up in the first place. Even though relationships may be gone, even though there may be some permanent damage in this world, as far as maybe those things can't be restored. But I can still find joy and peace, and I know my eternity can be secure, even if I was the one that messed it up. So that big picture kind of helps give me a different perspective. And I can see the loss, I can grieve the loss, but then I can also say, hey, I know something better is coming. I can rest in the Lord. And then this leads us, once we can acknowledge the loss, we understand that this is really hard, we can grieve. And it doesn't happen just in an instant. I still grieve because of the loss of Micah, but I know the goodness of who he was. I still grieve sometimes the losses because of my own sin, and I also have to deal with present sin. But then I know that I can go to the Lord to be restored and be forgiven. And because of that, I can move forward now. I'm not trapped by the loss. It doesn't hold me back forever. So we can make new plans. New plans. This doesn't mean you're forgetting or minimizing the thing that was lost. It's not like you're moving on or getting back to life. Oftentimes the very loss that you had informs who you are. It becomes part of your moving forward. Some of that times the hardest stuff in life is what, in fact, helps us to become the people we should be. After Micah passed away in 2012, we then went to a ministry called Smile Again Ministries. And I think it was just a month after he passed away. And this is a ministry run by another couple that had lost a daughter. And we did a bunch of activities that included remembering Micah. So our activities actually looked back to remember him. Also, as you're making new plans, because you've seen the big picture, and maybe because you've grieved the loss of the good things that you're missing, you can also take advantage of the blessings that you still have. I loved the other day in Oakland here, people were driving on Main Street and they were honking their horns and going by. They had to keep their social distance, but they were able to get out and do something fun with the family. You can likely, wherever you're at, still get out, at least into nature. You can spend more time as a family. This might be an opportunity to take advantage. You can, maybe this opportunity to slow down, to read. Take advantage of this technology. Get a hold of people. Call them. Build deeper relationships in your life. Maybe get rid of things. Maybe you'll discover that some of the things that were in your life that you can't have now didn't need to be there, and maybe weren't bringing you real joy, and you weren't building towards eternity. So maybe after you grieve the loss, in the process of grieving the loss, you can refocus on things that are more important. I've seen lots of different posts on social media about, really remembering your family, loving your family in this moment. I want to close with a story. I've never got to meet Tracy's great-grandmother. I think this was her dad's mom's mom, great-grandmother, that Tracy as a kid would go to visit. But I never met her, but I know about her because Tracy has talked about her and how going to great-grandmother's house was an incredible blessing for the family. And Tracy's great-grandmother had polio when she, at some point in life, and had become disabled because of it, was in a wheelchair. I think most of Tracy's life that she remembers her. And it really wasn't too long before I met Tracy that Tracy's great-grandmother had passed away, and the whole family had gathered around. And Tracy's great-grandmother knew the Lord, and even as they were there with her, they recognized that she was going to go be with Jesus. And so this woman who had loss in her life had turned that loss into something where she became a blessing to other people. Just because she had polio, didn't matter. And even her loss in the fact that she died and went away, even that was a blessing as the family gathered around her, knowing that her eternity was secure. So you see, God uses these losses, the grieving in this world, to help us refocus and recognize both the good things he's already given us, but secondly, that there's something to look forward to. So I just want to remind you again of what the Apostle Paul says. I'm going to go over to the passage here in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep. He's talking about those Christians who have died, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. If you know Jesus, you have an eternal hope. And I want to just encourage you, if you don't have that hope, to seek him, to see in the midst of loss and grief, whether you might discover that your life can have eternal focus, eternal perspective, and that even in the midst of all the loss, you can find hope and joy moving forward. God bless. I hope you find Jesus. Hope you trust him.